G'day, my name is Michael Tesaro, and I've prepared this presentation entitled ACCC Essentials, Understanding the ACCC's 2025-2026 Compliance and Enforcement Priorities. So what I've been doing these talks for a few years now, but what I'll be doing is running through what the ACCC has said it will be focusing on in 2025-2026 in relation to its enforcement activities. And I guess one thing I'll be doing is explaining a bit more of the background about how it comes about and what it all means. I think just telling you what the priorities are, it doesn't seem super helpful. Having a bit of context is important. And I like using that image because I've got a very high opinion of the ACCC. I think they're doing a great job. And I think, I guess compared to other Australian regulators, I think they're probably the superhero status, top of the group in Australia in terms of the way they do their work. Bit of background about myself: I'm a competition and consumer lawyer, and I've been running my own practice to Solo Consulting for the last 18 years, and I help companies, individuals with competition and consumer law matters. I also do some expert consultancy work for various legal publishers explaining about competition and consumer law, and I've got a part-time gig as a general member of the New South Wales Civil Administrative Tribunal Consumer and Commercial Division. So it's good fun. I get to do some real live consumer law matters. Prior to that, I worked at ACCC 15 years in a variety of roles: direct enforcement, director running the Sydney Mergers and Asset Sales branch. So I've got the regulator experience as well. Outline presentation, start with some background, explain why the ACCC has priorities, look at how it comes about these priorities, what they are for 2025, 2026, then look at the enduring priorities, a few other issues, and then a bit of commentary. Background, why it's important? Well, it's important to provide business with as much guidance as possible as to what the regulator is going to be looking at. It seems a bit unfair to the ACCC just to go off and pursue different areas, and businesses are caught totally unaware. So obviously telegraphing what you're going to be looking at is good from two perspectives. I guess probably the first perspective is if you know you're on the list or in your industry that's being looked at, you've got an opportunity to sort of fix your house up, get everything in order, and that's a sensible thing to do. If they're saying they're looking at consumer industries and telco, well, it's time to review your telecommunications advertising and see if you can fix it up. So that's important. It's also important because ACCC gets a lot of complaints, and how does it determine which ones it's going to look at? So it needs to very, very firmly cull down the number of complaints it gets and focus on areas that are important. The way it's formulated is interesting. The ACCC actually consults with various parties, stakeholders, and asks them, well, what do you think is important? What areas do you see in the market are concerns? They talk to lawyers. I've been spoken to them a few times about the priorities. And you can just sort of say, well, this is an issue that I think I've seen in the market, or it's an issue coming from overseas. You know, the US, you see these types of clauses and they're making their way to Australia. And so that's an opportunity for the ACCC to get that intelligence from the community and from industry. The other way, obviously, they look at all their internal intelligence, see the areas of concern, and then they use that, obviously, to formulate the priority. So there are a couple of internal, external sources of information. They're released in February, March every year, and I guess they now align to the financial year. So they go from June to July. So that's really helpful because I guess businesses operate their businesses in that financial year usually. But I think also importantly, the ACCC reports to Parliament in the annual report over that period. And so now when the ACCC reports to Parliament, they can say, okay, in the 25-26 year, this is what we did based on what we said we were going to do. So there's a transparency and accountability. And they actually do that. They go through the annual report and they go, okay, priority areas 1, 2, and 3. That's what we said we're going to do. Here are the cases we ran in those areas, and they go through. So there's this quite close line between what they say they're going to do and their performance, as shown by their annual reports. Now, I said the ACCC gets a lot of complaints, and as you can see, they get almost 400,000 contacts a year. Of those, a number are reported in their database, quite a large number, 390,000 are reported in their database. Of those, 288,000 were scam related. So they're sort of dealt with a bit differently nowadays. And then the rest are non-scam related, 100,000 complaints. It's a big number of potentially consumer and competition law complaints that they've got to deal with. It's a big number, and they've got to have some way of very quickly and strictly culling that back to a manageable number. Now, this document or this image in a previous annual general report, they don't seem to have it in the current one, but it's called the litigation funnel. It's very helpful in explaining and understanding the way the ACCC does its prioritisation. So it gets this 100,000 complaints, and it has to look at which of those it wants to look at a little bit more deeply. So it might be looking at very serious conduct. It may be looking at a large number of complaints about a particular trader, or maybe a two-time loser, three-time loser, somebody they've had a problem with before who's now seems to be doing it again. So there might be the types of factors that they look at, and then they give it to an investigator. Investigator does a little bit of initial work, looks at the database, does a bit of research, and then on those 254, they decide to go a bit deeper with 157. And that means they'll write to the trader, and say, okay, we've had a complaint about you, we're concerned about X, Y, and Z, please provide an explanation, give us some documents, usually along those lines. So they're getting a bit more into it, seeing a bit more, seeing if it's worthwhile pursuing. Of those, 68 go to in-depth investigations, and that's where it gets serious, because that's the stage at which the investigator or the team reports to the commissioners on the enforcement committee and tells them, hey, we have a case here, we want to take it further, we want you to know about the case, but also we want something from you. It might be a budget to hire lawyers, it might be authorization to issue a notice, like a Section 155 notice, to a search warrant. So actually, not only are the commissioners aware of your case at that stage, but the ACCC is committing resources to the case, and as if any, like a business, they commit resources to a case, they want something to show for it. So when you get to that stage, the ACCC is very keen to get a result. And as you can see in this litigation funnel, 15 matters went to litigation. So you're thinking there, if I get to in-depth investigation, there's like a 25% chance that I'm going to get sued. But it's not really the whole story. And I'll use the current numbers, 23, 24. As you can see, they resolve matters three different ways. They either sue you, they get an undertaking, or they issue an infringement notice to you. So as you can see in 24, 25, I've got different numbers there, but that's actually the numbers for 23, 24, sorry. 9 new cases were commenced. Section 87B undertakings, they received 9 of those, and they issued infringement notice to 17 companies. So if you go back to that earlier diagram, which says 68 in-depth investigations, you can see of those 68 in-depth investigations, they got formal outcomes in 35 of those matters. So the probability is much higher than might have appeared. And the earlier thing you say was a 25% chance of getting sued, but there's actually more than a 50% chance that if you get to the in-depth investigation phase, you're going to be required to do one of these 3 things. You're either going to get taken to court, you're either going to get hit with a Section 87B undertaking, which includes lots of requirements like of injunctions, declarations, maybe refunds, and a compliance program. So it's a serious commitment. And then, as you can see, 17 companies got served with infringement notices. So that's a much higher number in actual individual infringement notices. So it's common to get served with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 infringement notices at once. So the number of infringement notices that ACCC obtained in that particular year is probably closer to 100. I know Tesla got hit with 10 infringement notices. So this is what you've got to realise, that if you are a company and if you're the in-depth investigation phase, there's a 50% chance, or greater than 50% chance, that you're going to be required to give a formal outcome to the ACCC. Now, these are some of the cases ran in 23, 24. I think that's the right financial year, sorry. And as you can see, there's a bunch of cases. Phoenix Institute City, that's $438 million. Now, that's a bit misleading because that's a case against a company liquidation. So I just like describing it as a Phoenix fine, which is somewhat ironic given the company's Phoenix Institute, but that's a penalty that's never going to be paid. And so you can probably even ignore that. The serious one, BlueScope, that was a contested case for attempted civil cartel, so that's a big fine for an attempt. Bingo was to plead guilty on a criminal cartel, and the managing director of Bingo plus Aussie Skips and the managing director of Aussie Skips all got fined a criminal term imprisonment, but was suspended. Meta, that was receiving deceptive conduct, they tapped them out, they gave up. Tektronix was a resale price maintenance, 15 million, again, they gave up. Airbnb, 15 million, misleading conduct. It sounds like a bit of a glitch to me, that one. but they gave up. Fitbit, 11 million, misleading deceptive conduct about warranties and rights, consumer rights. Again, they gave up 11 million. Dell's a bit embarrassing. They have a computer glitch, which is embarrassing for a computer company, I guess, but $10 million for mispricing some of their products on their website. And again, they gave up. And Honda made some misrepresentations about a former dealer, so they got hit with $6 million. So you see, most of those cases, people are either pleaded guilty or just given up. And so it says a few things. It says that the ACCC is pretty good at picking cases it can win, but also companies aren't wanting to fight the ACCC. There's not much point. ACCC is probably going to win, so that these companies, Airbnb, Fitbit, Dell, they could easily fight ACCC. They've got plenty of money, but there's no point because ACCC selected cases which are strong. The one at the end is a bit funny. Like Altitude fought some franchise and consumer law breaches, lost. They didn't do what they were supposed to do. Got done with contempt. Got fined another $1.5 million, and they appealed that the other day, and that's actually been dismissed. So I don't know if that's quite over yet, but that definitely wasn't by consent. I guess the other thing here is you see over the last few years the numbers have been much bigger. A few years ago it would have been 3 million, 2 million, 1.5 million. Now you got 30, 20, 15 by consent. And I think in a few years' time that's going to be 300, 200, 150. The penalties are definitely going up exponentially in this field. Okay, so here's the ACCC's performance 23-24, and as you can see, the number of in-depth competition investigations. They said they were going to do 15, and they did 15, which is pretty good. It's a pretty good strike rate. They're not easy cases. A lot of them misuse of market power, and even a simple like anti-competitive agreement case can be very large. The number of actual enforcement type outcomes, 7, so that's pretty good. I think it might drop off in the next financial year, but they're doing pretty well on both of those measures. Then you got the consumer law ones. You got like 60. So when you look at the previous table there, you had 60 plus 15, so it's 75 in-depth investigations, which is up from what the litigation funnel said. That was 68. So they're doing more in-depth investigations than they did historically. As you can see, the number of actual enforcement outcomes, they've got 35 plus the 7, 42. So that's more than I had in my list. I didn't include administrative resolutions in my list. So there were a few administrative resolutions, and people changed their terms and conditions for unfair contract terms. But as you can see, they're performing really well. Like they've got a target of 60. They had a target of 40, which I think maybe a bit on the high side, but they didn't hit that target. But still, that's a lot of litigation they're doing. And as you can see from the earlier table, they're doing cases against the big end of town. Then in terms of product safety, there's interventions and enforcement. So in terms of interventions, they're 7, target 3. In terms of enforcement, they're 11, 3. So they're doing a lot more work in this area, much more work than probably anticipated. I think that's largely due to the fact that the button battery is sort of their brainchild, and they're very keen to enforce that one. And they've got some other ones that they have a particular interest in, top-link furniture and some of the child safety things. So they're going to be much more active where they have this, a closer affinity with the standard. They're going to do more enforcement. And then you've got the number of code compliance. So they're doing a lot of work. This is, writing to various entities and trying to get them to fix things up, or doing industry code audits and things like that. So they've been very active in the industry code sector. So they've obviously been meeting their compliance priority areas across the board. Now, how does it approach prioritisation? Well, it's guided by these principles: promote competition among businesses, promote fair trading by businesses, and protect consumers. So unless they're going to achieve one of those goals, they won't look at it. And that's often why they don't pursue a lot of cases where there's two private players and they can easily go to court and fight out themselves. They won't run those cases. Then they also look at these factors. So that if your industry is on the list of the hit list, so to speak, don't worry. It also comes down to these factors. So they'll only take on matters where there's significant public interest or concern. Makes sense. Why take cases that nobody cares about? Results in substantial consumer or small business detriment. So if some conduct's not going to hurt anybody, why would you take a case? Again, very sensible priority. Conduct involves national conduct by large traders who might be copied by smaller traders, and I think that's an interesting one. Based on this very blunt sort of enforcement theory that if you sort of take the biggest trader out in the market who's doing something bad, then all the little guys fall into line. That's the theory. I don't know if it actually works. The little guys sort of have a bit of a laugh and keep doing what they're doing, but that's the idea. If you're a big trader and everybody in the industry is doing something wrong, then you can be pretty certain that ACCC are going to go after you, not the low-hanging fruit. They've never been really, at least in recent times, never been one for taking on the low-hanging fruit. The conduct involves significant new or emerging market issues, so that's clearly digital's right up there. AI issues are going to be right up there, and they want to just, I guess, nip bad conduct in the bud. No problem letting it get intent. No point letting it get entrenched in particular markets. And then finally, clarify the law. ACCC is not super big on test cases, so to speak. I think what it'll do, if there's a bit of new law, they'll try and find a case that ticks some of the other boxes, significant interest or substantial consumer detriment. They find something like that, then they'll probably want to pursue it. And then if the law's uncertain, it'll get sorted out along the way. Now, here are the priorities of the hit list. Firstly, competition issues in relation to supermarket and retail sector. So that's no surprise. They're obviously concerned about the level of competition between Coles and Woolies and I guess the growing dominance of them in the market. I guess it's interesting, they've done a report which been given to the Parliament about the supermarket sector, and it's got to do with consumer and competition issues, and the government's been sitting on it, so I don't know whether it's got something they don't like, or rather it's probably some massive report that ACCC tends to do, and the government's got to take a bit of time reading it all and working out how it's going to respond. But there's going to be some interesting news about maybe some competition issues in the supermarket sector going forward. It'd be interesting if they actually recommend divestiture. I think they'd be brave to do that. Consumer and fair trading concerns of the supermarket sector. So that's obviously a big issue. And there's that case ACCC took about Coles and Woolies discount pricing. And so there's going to be more focus on the way these large supermarket and other retailers advertise their prices. Promoting competition in essential services with a focus on telecommunications, electricity and gas. I was a bit surprised at that because I don't know how much they can do to promote competition in those sectors. They're all regulated sectors, aren't they, pretty much? And there's not much competition. So I don't know what you do. Like, you probably prevent any further acquisitions or mergers, but I'm a bit puzzled how they can promote competition in those sectors. Misleading pricing and claims in relation to essential services. So this is a big issue. Energy, telecommunications. There's a lot of requirements there to tell customers various things in energy, lowest priced, best offers, things like that. And even the big guys seem to be breaching a lot of those obligations time and time again. So I think this is saying we're going to be taking very, very strong action if you get it wrong going forward. And there's a lot of misleading and deceptive conduct in these sectors. Competition and consumer issues in the aviation sector. Again, a bit puzzled what they can do in competition terms. Like, if there was any allegations of the existing players driving out the small guys like Rex and Bonza, well, I think they're historic now, aren't they? They're both gone. So I don't know what they can do in relation to competition. Maybe allowing new players to come to the market like Qatar tried to do some time ago. But clearly the consumer issues in this sector are significant. There's that big Qantas case, $100 million penalty, and you just got to think that maybe there's more misleading conduct going on in the market. But usually there's misleading conduct where there's a bit of competition, people trying to get ahead. Here there's no competition, so I don't know why you'd be trying to mislead people. You don't need to, do you, really? Anyway, competition, product safety, consumer and fair trading issues in digital economy with a focus on misleading deceptive advertising with influencer marketing, online reviews, in-app purchases and unsafe consumer products. That's a monster big priority when you think about it. So much in that. And that, you'd have a whole government department just doing that work. So again, ACCC is biting off a lot. How are they going to deal with all these issues? There's so much there, competition issues, product safety, consumer fair trading, and then they've identified a bunch of areas, quite unregulated really when you think about it. So it's a big priority. They're going to be very busy doing that work. You're seeing surcharging practices and other add-on costs. That's a brand new one. This is all related to a lot of the talk by the Reserve Bank to change a lot of the practices in this area, and obviously no point changing requirements and not having some of that enforced compliance. So that'll be a big area of activity for the ACCC. Consumer fair trading and competition concerns in relation to environmental claims, sustainability, and focus on greenwashing. So ACCC hasn't done a whole lot here compared to ASIC. I think it's got some big cases in the organisation from various consumer groups, and I expect some biggies in the new year. So I think that we'll see some significant cases coming out. Unfair contract terms in consumer and small business contracts, and then they've actually specified harmful cancellation terms, including those associated with automatic renewals, early termination fee clauses, and non-cancellation clauses. So this is good because, you can't just say we're going to do unfair contract terms. You've got to be more specific so that, traders can say, okay, let's have a look at my terms and conditions. Let's look for these particular terms and see how they're working. You can't help thinking here that maybe the ACCC has sort of identified a few areas where it's got a few cases coming through already. It might be a bit cynical, but it's mighty specific, and I'm just wondering whether they've got a few cases on these specific issues pretty soon to being announced. Improved industry compliance with consumer guarantees with a focus on consumer electronics. Cannot believe this is still on the list. These laws came in 15 years ago and people are still getting it wrong, and it's not rocket science. Consumer guarantees is pretty straightforward. So the fact that companies are still getting it wrong suggests to me it's for, commercial reasons, and they're just not really caring. So I can think the penalties are going to go up when next time they catch somebody for this. I think the penalty is going to be much higher. So this is an issue that has to be gotten right by traders. Improving compliance with NDIS providers and their obligations under ACL. This is interesting, I think. Nobody really expected ACCC to have a role in monitoring and NDIS providers. And I think they were probably as surprised as anybody when they got asked to do the work. Not only did they asked to do the work, but they're sort of leading the whole show, which is very surprising. But they've already taken action against one provider. I think a lot more will follow. And it's important work because there's a lot of vulnerable people in that market. Consumer product safety issues for young children, and that used to be the priority, but they've added a bit of context, which is helpful. Button battery standards, raising awareness about new infant sleep and toppling furniture standards. So what they're saying there is we're going to take enforcement action on button battery, which they did a lot of last year, and they're going to be educating people about infant sleep and toppling furniture standards. So you've got a little bit of leeway there to get your house in order, but by the end of the financial year, I reckon they're going to be taking enforcement actions against people not complying with those standards. Now, these enduring priorities, these are always important, and they'll always, when a case comes in one of these areas, it'll get pushed to the top of the pile. Cartel conduct, that's both civil and criminal cartels. It's been very quiet. They've run that civil cartel late last year, Spotless and Ventia, but really since prior to that, it's been very quiet. I think they're having a lot of trouble with the criminal cartel provisions. I think every contested case has been lost. Everything else has been plead guilty. So the law is problematic, and I wouldn't be surprised if talking behind the scenes about getting the laws changed, make it a bit easier to run these cases. Anti-competitive conduct, so we've got anti-competitive agreements, misuse of market power, big cases, always on the lookout. The big case we've got running at the moment, MasterCard, which is bigger than Ben-Hur, and is really, really sapping their resources, I think, at the ACCC. It's just old style, taking no prisoners litigation by the looks of it. Product safety, ACCC will always prioritise product safety, and I think that's shown out by the numbers. That's a high priority for the ACCC. Vulnerable and disadvantaged consumers, obviously that's really important, and I think the NDIS just fits perfectly into that area. There's a lot of very vulnerable people who can't be misled by representations by NDIS providers, so I think they're ticking that box quite well. And then finally, conduct impacting First Nation Australians. So this is just an outrage, the way the companies go to remote communities and rip off all these First Nations Australians, selling them stuff that doesn't work, they don't need, all the rest of it, for very high prices. So it's good the ACCC is focused on this. They've been really good on this for a long time, I think. Small business, committed to ensuring the protections of competition and consumer laws for small business, industry codes. And I think this is a fraud area because obviously protecting small business from misleading representations, unfair contract terms, making sure they get the benefit of industry codes is all pretty easy stuff. But competition concerns is difficult because realistically, what can you do? If small businesses can't compete due to scale, resources, you can't do anything to really help them in that scenario. So I'm not too sure how the ACCC is going to tick this box on the competition side, except maybe in terms of the misuse of market power case and small competitors are getting smashed, then maybe they can protect them. But really, I think having competition issues there is for the ACCC. And scams was a newish one. It should have been there all along when you think about it. but it's a big focus. And there's this scam prevention framework which just came out recently with a lot of hullabaloo. It's really just principles at the moment, but the future will have a series of codes which will spell out particular obligations, and we're starting with the banks, the telcos, and digital platforms. They're the first guys who are going to have to comply with the new framework. That's a big area, and that's obviously an important area to focus on. Now, a couple of areas I think the ACCC should be focusing on maybe going forward: misleading animal welfare claims. It's not environmental, but I think it's an area where if they looked hard enough, I think they'd find quite a few dodgy claims in relation to animal welfare. And so that would be a pretty cool area to look at. Anti-competitive labour market agreements, I think they should look at this for a couple of reasons. I think firstly, it's a big focus overseas in Europe, in the US. I know our laws are a bit different here. There's some exemptions in relation to some of these areas, but I wouldn't be surprised if there was some anti-competitive labour agreements that could be caught by the legislation. And so I think they should be focusing a bit on that. The other thing that's interesting is in America, obviously, the Biden administration, Federal Trade Commission banned restraints of trade, and then now I think, I don't know, Trump probably reversed it, but it's an issue that the Australian Treasury are looking at. They had a consultation about it, and I spoke to them about it, and it's really an interesting issue as to whether Australia is going to maybe look at some restrictions on restraints of trade or banning them. The Competition Task Force has done a consultation. I think they're going to prepare a report for government, so we'll see what that says. That's a really interesting diagram in the AGM, the annual report for the ACCC. The gender profile, as you can see, in I think every category, there's more women than men in every role. So it's just remarkable. I wouldn't think there'd be many organisations in Australia of the size of the ACCC that could boast this sort of gender profile. So this is, well, two things. It's very, very good that this is happening, but also it's a big change from when I was there, because I think when you went up to the higher levels of the organisation, it was dominated largely by men. And so that's a big turnaround. I think that's a very positive development. And just again, I don't think there'd be too many organisations that could mirror this sort of profile. I think it's a tiny bit ironic that when I was going through the annual report, I saw that the organisations receiving a share of reportable non-consultancy contract expenditure for the 2024, the number one was Ventia, who they just sued for cartel conduct. The $17 million is going from the ACCC to Ventia for various services, probably property services. And now they sued it for price fixing in relation to defence contracts. So I guess they could pay a $17 million fine, just give the money back to the ACCC. I thought it was somewhat ironic that their biggest non-consultancy contract supplier has actually been sued by them for civil cartel. And I guess I should say nothing's been proven, so maybe they didn't do anything wrong. So I guess that's all I had to say really about the priorities. I guess the thing is, if you're in business and you see your industry on this list, I think it's really important to get cracking on some measures to prevent yourself getting in trouble. First thing is conduct a risk assessment, see what your risks are. And you can do that internally, externally, hire someone like me to do that. Just go through the whole business, work out where you've got risks and work out how serious they are and what to do about them. You just need to do that first up. You need to appoint a compliance officer, somebody whose job is to do this work, to look at the compliance organisation, work out ways of sorting things out, get things done, make sure they're relatively senior, make sure they know what they're doing, and make sure they're not run off their feet, that they can actually devote enough time to doing this work. Implement a compliance policy, so just don't implement a policy, but roll it out, train your staff about it, make sure it's their go-to document whenever they've got any compliance issues, and that if they're in doubt, go to the compliance officer. Implement relevant policies, complaints handling policy, very important. You've got to have a nice, clear process for how you're going to deal with complaints. Whistleblower policy is also helpful. It's not quite as important as a complaints handling policy, but definitely complaints handling policy is important, and also train people on it, get it out there to your customer base. Establish an effective complaints handling procedure. That's so important, because if you have a good procedure, you'll be able to nip a lot of complaints in the bud before they get into ACCC's hot little hands and they come after you. So you need a procedure that's that records everything, that has short time frames to investigate, respond, and resolve matters. And you've got to have some process where you look over all the complaints you received and can work out systemic problems and fix those systemic problems in your business ASAP. And finally, you've got to train people on definitely the consumer law, a little bit of competition, well, depending what sector you are. If you're in a particular sector, maybe you want to do a lot of competition, but definitely consumer law compliance training is really, really important. You've got to provide that to all staff. So that's all I had. I guess just a bit of commentary. It's a quite long list of compliance issues here for the ACCC. They've sort of set out a lot of work to do in the coming year, and I'm a bit worried they don't have enough resources to actually get it done. So just hopeful that the government realises they've got to be given more resources, particularly when they run a big successful case. Like, they ran the Qantas case. Guarantee the number of people calling the ACCC for help rose after that case. And when they talk about supermarkets and the supermarket case that they commenced against Coles and Woolies, that's going to result in so many more people contacting the ACCC. So the government has to be a step ahead, say, well, if they run a big, it's like anything, if you get some positive press, you're going to have more customers. Well, if you get a positive enforcement outcome, you're going to have more customers complaining to you. So they just got to give the agency the resources they need to do the job. I think it's good actual return on investment because, I think for every dollar the ACCC gets, they probably get, $2 back in fines. I don't really know the numbers, but I'm sure they fund themselves. So anyway, that's all I had. If you have any questions, feel free to give me a call or drop me an email. Bye-bye.